If you're Nigerian and you are in the United States or maybe in the UK, there's a common theme in how we deal with our finances, and I want to talk about that in this video. Now, generally speaking, majority of us that are immigrants in this Western world, we often strive to achieve a lot of things within a very short amount of time. And that's generally the mindset we come over with. So we come to the States or the UK, and then we just want to achieve so much, do so much, make so much money, and go home at some point in time. And that alone, that mentality can sometimes set us up for, I guess, failure. And I'm going to explain exactly what I mean. So if you're new here, welcome. If you're a returning subscriber, of course, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like, share, and leave your comments in the comment section below. It goes a long way, all that good stuff. Now, let's talk about the first part of this. As a Nigerian, we blacks in general, we are generally accustomed to doing things that are sometimes way outside of our comfort zone. And that means we are able to do whatever it takes to achieve a certain level of success that we desire. Now, unfortunately, that's tend to also set us up for failure. So let's assume that you have just recently moved to the States. One of the important things that a lot of immigrants do is, the ability to access credit. And this is something that, even though, let's say you're a Nigerian or anybody from Africa, you're generally not so used to having credit easily given to you, like loans. And because of this, the fact that we are so used to a system where, I've been here for over 10 years now, but I still have that mindset of having to save up money before I do certain things. I want to buy a new phone, I want to buy a new car, whatever. I want to save up the money for it. And that's still how I operate, even though I've kind of grown and I've adapted to the system a bit, but I still carefully choose what I use credit for. And I'm going to explain in detail. Generally speaking, a lot of people would want, after moving to the States, they want to just buy things. You're getting a new place, maybe renting an apartment, you need a car, you need a phone, you need to set up your utilities, all that stuff. Generally speaking, you would need some form of credit. Now, how do you go about picking the right ones to go into debt for, right? Like, if you're going to get a new phone, is it worth going into debt for that? And even though they make this a contract, they give you the phone for $0, and then they tell you that you're tied into a contract for maybe 2 years or so. And in as much as those things don't cost you money right up front, it does cost you something over a long time, right? Because you're now tied into this contract that you cannot break out of. They would always introduce to you the new upgrades, and then you're tied into this cycle of changing your phones regularly, which is cool, right? Because you always get new phones. But guess what? You can't get out of that contract. And then they help your fees or your monthly bills every now and then, and you're kind of just stuck into that. And then that's how you'd hear people paying over $150 for one line because they get a new phone, they have the upgrades, and they can't break the contract or get out of that cycle. That's one thing. The other thing I want to really hammer on is credit card. A lot of immigrants in general always fall into this habit of getting credit cards. And credit cards are cool, right? Because you can always hand up points. You can always use those points for other purposes. And sometimes you even get cash, you get some money back, right? But the truth about this is also that these banks are looking for ways for you to default or somehow miss payments, and they charge you an interest, they charge you late fees. And if you look at these credit cards nowadays, the average interest on these credit cards is around 25% to 35%, somewhere in between there. And if you're not careful, your quick $20 debt that you didn't pay off can slowly become a $2,000 debt over the years. And this is why I always encourage a lot of immigrants, or even just myself, I remind myself that anything you put on a credit card, should be paid off as soon as possible. And that is, I'm talking about if you're going to buy something, you're going to buy, I don't know, a phone, and you put it on a credit card, make sure you have the cash to pay it off as soon as possible. The worst part of this is, as immigrants, we're trying to build wealth, we're trying to build this financial stability, and then we find ourselves tied into something that is drawing us back. How do you move a boat, or how do you float your boat when it's actually leaking, right? And that is really what you want to keep in mind when it comes to building your finances, right? You want to remember that if you have holes in your boat, then your boat won't float. It's going to sink. And the same thing goes with your finances. Having a huge amount of debt on a credit card, for example, is one of those things that, majority of the time, you can't just turn around and say, oh, I'm just going to cancel the credit card without paying it off, right? You can't just get out of it. You have to pay it off. Otherwise, it's going to hit your credit report. And if it goes on your credit report, it becomes a whole lot more, because now you can't say get a mortgage, or you can't say buy the things that will make your life better because of just that credit report, or that net derogatory report that you have on your credit. All right. So that's something that you need to keep in mind when it comes to credit card. The other thing that I have seen a lot of Nigerians, and not just Nigerians, Africans or blacks in general, really get their hands into is car notes. All right. Loans on cars. And I'll be honest with you, cars are generally some of the things that I try to I don't change my cars regularly, even though I can afford to do that. But you need to understand that the word affordability doesn't necessarily mean that you can afford it. All right. Just because you can make the payments every month doesn't mean you can afford it. And I was actually sharing this with my wife the other day, and I was saying, a lot of times we make decisions based on our present circumstance, right? Or our situation at the moment. We forget to plan for the future. Let me explain what I mean. If you are currently single, say you're 24, 25, let's say you're a lady, you want a nice car, you have a job, you can make the payment. So you go to a dealership, right? They tell you, oh, it's going to be, they run the numbers for you. They tell you it's going to be, let's say $450 to $500, let's say $500 for simple numbers every month. You're like, oh, sure, for the next 60 months, for example. You're like, sure, I can afford that. It's just $500. That $500 though, 2 years down into your career, right? Sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you want to change jobs, but your life expenses won't let you make the move that you need to make. And a lot of people find themselves in this situation. Very good example is another one of, say, mortgage. You go get a very expensive mortgage, and now you want to make a move for a job that maybe pay you less, but has a better potential down the line. But because of your life expenses or your life, your bills that you pay on a regular basis, you're unable to make that move that will temporarily reduce your income, but has a better longevity in terms of career growth, in terms of just the opportunities down the line, and even better income down the line. And that's why I always say, when you are planning to make certain decisions, I know there's no perfect, you don't have the crystal ball to be able to see what the future holds. But one thing to always keep in mind is leave room for some error. Don't max out your income. If your income is, say, $7,000 per month, don't go spend more than, $4,000 a month. Leave room for $3,000 that goes into savings, that goes into emergency funds, that goes into investments, right? Don't go out buying things just because you can afford it. Don't go out maxing out what you make. That is very important. And also to say this, it is important to remember that your current situation is generally the cheapest phase you get to, right? So unless something drastic changes in your life. What I mean is, generally speaking, when you're young, your expenses are very low, right? You don't really have much responsibilities. You don't really have a lot of people depending on you. You don't really have a lot of bills. Maybe you're even still living with your parents, or you're sharing a room with a friend. But as you grow older, you become, maybe you have a partner, you have a wife, you have a child, you have a house, right? And all those things come with their own expenses, their unique expenses. And that means that you are generally going to have to spend more on the basic things. Okay, no, these are just the basic things at this point. And that require that you plan ahead, you think ahead. And that's, I try to do this. Of course, I'm not perfect, but I try to ask myself, what are my plans for the next 5 years? All right. And this is really how to close this. When you are going to make a purchase that you believe will stick with you for years to come, say like a car, or you're getting to something that is like that is a contract based, or maybe a house, ask yourself, all right, what are your plans for the next 4 or 5 years down the line? Do you think this investment will hinder you from being able to make those plans a reality? There are times when sacrifices would need to be made, right? And that means you have to do that thing in order for you to be able to opt, to be in a particular place. For example, you need to move to a place, right, for a job, because that job is what is really footing your bills right now, but you need to move for it. And now your bills are a little bit more than what they were. I guess that makes sense, because for your career progression, you need to be able to keep that job, and that will require that you move to a place that may be more expensive. You don't really have much control with that. But in a situation where you do have the option to still keep that same job that pays you well, but then you can live in a place that is slightly maybe cheaper for you and gives you more money to either save, invest, start a business, do something that you are passionate about. Honestly, you can't really quantify that in terms of dollar value, right? And that's where the freedom comes from. Your freedom to be able to do the things that you want at the time you want them is important. It's not just all about having the fancy things, having the nice house, having the fancy cars, having the latest phones. And those are things that I try to remind myself about, that at the end of the day, I always say vanity upon vanity. You might have the nicest things today, but then tomorrow it's all gone. And that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind. So anyway, for my immigrant sisters and brothers out there, understand that, our journey here is our life. This is our life. And a lot of us do focus on going back home and doing this and doing that. And those things are great. But at the end of the day, we need to live our lives here and live it responsibly, right? And that's something that I hope that we all get to do. I wish you guys the best of luck in your endeavors. And of course, don't forget to, subscribe to the channel. And I'd love to see you in a future video.